super excited to begin and introduce my dear friend. You may have seen her groundbreaking journalism as a correspondent on CNN and 60 Minutes. She's now the CEO of ... Media, Lori Siegel, who will be interviewing Dr. Toyin Ajayi, who is the CEO and co-founder of CityBlock Health, and Dr. Rachel Gillum, who is the head of, or the VP of Ethical and Humane Tech at Salesforce. Rachel, Toyin, Lori, welcome. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Wow. What a slow week in tech, right? But all the more reason this conversation is so important. We were just talking off stage and just talking about what a huge moment for the tech industry and for society this is. And I'm so excited to be sitting here with both of you guys because, man, I started covering technology a decade ago, more than a decade ago, which is like in tech years, I'm like 100 at this point. And if you've been building in tech years, you understand that.
Absolutely.
And we have seen the good, the bad, the ugly, the exciting, the innovative. And now it seems like a really interesting moment to take a step back and have a bit of a reset. So to start, I will start with you, Dr. Toyin Ajayi. You are the co-founder and CEO of CityBlock Health, as Lyle said. Talk to me a little bit about your background and why you decided to start CityBlock. What need were you looking to fill?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And this is really a fun conversation to have. I'm glad we have the time to dig in. I think my story started, like many entrepreneurs' story, with a very deeply personally felt problem that I felt compelled to just eat away at until I could try to find a solution to. I'm a physician. I trained in family practice. My whole practice and my whole reason for going into medicine was about improving care for underserved populations. And in my early practice as a doctor in a clinic and in a hospital, I got to see firsthand the ways in which the existing system that reimburses for care, for healthcare, sort of on a transactional basis, on the basis of what you get done that day or what type of visit you have, and is entirely divorced from sort of paying for value, actually incentivizes us to do worse by people who need us the most, and creates a revolving door of medically complex, psychiatrically complex individuals coming in and out of the emergency room, in and out of the hospital, getting increasingly more expensive and frankly less valuable healthcare services because that's how we pay for it. And as someone who doesn't come from an entrepreneur background at all, doesn't come from technology, doesn't come from finance, the path to learning enough about the problem to figure out what part of the solution I wanted to have took me a long time. So I moved from being a frontline practicing doctor to an administrator in a health system to a health plan to understand how we pay for healthcare, to where I find myself today, to a co-founder of a company that's really trying to transform the payment structure, using transformations in the payment structure to incentivize innovation in care delivery that provides more dignified, respectful, and high-value care to marginalized people, to people who receive their health insurance through Medicaid, so they're lower income, and people with disabilities, both physical and behavioral health disabilities, as well as the sort of sequelae of the social challenges that exist in our ecosystem.
Was there a moment, you talk about you don't have a tech background. I think so many people who want to do different types of startups, diverse type of startups, might not have that background. Was there a moment for you that you were like, this is really messed up, I'm going to take the leap? Anything you can pinpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it was a sort of slow trickle. I think the problem that we're solving is such an interesting one because it is so emblematic of the various ways in which a dysfunctional system impacts lots of different agents, right? So it's way more expensive to provide inefficient, low-value care to people with complex needs. It feels really badly. So patients feel more disenfranchised, more marginalized. The trust barrier comes down. And it also feels bad for clinicians. And I was feeling sort of burned out doing the same thing over and over again without feeling like I was having an impact. And so the sort of slow trickle of like, this is not working for anybody. This system can't hold. It's totally unsustainable. It must be disrupted. Plus, I think a combination for many founders, particularly again people who are not serial entrepreneurs for whom this is their thing, it's a healthy combination of like naivete and hubris. Like you don't really know what you're signing up for, so like why not? And you really believe that you can do something different. You believe that actually it's not you who's flawed, it's the system that's flawed, and you've seen a different way. And so for me, that came late 2016, early 2017, and it's hard not to think about politics in the sort of it's the day after the election. But at that time, we as a country elected in an administration that was saying very publicly things that impacted my patients. Discussions about immigration, discussions about implicit and explicit, the role of diversity in any sort of consideration of public policy. What does it mean to fund public supports and services on which my patients were dependent? And the idea that we were entering 4 years, at least at that point, of a time in which policy wasn't going to be the lever to change and to drive equitable health outcomes for people that I really wanted to serve. I didn't see the incumbent health systems that I was so intimately familiar with that make their money doing the same thing over and over again, being motivated to change. There's no other way but to try something really radically different from the outside in.
Right. And Rachel, and where are you calling in from, Rachel, for context?
I'm in Berkeley, California.
Awesome. Well, good to have you here. And so you're the Vice President of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology at Salesforce, which is a pretty big role considering the reach of Salesforce and the influence of Salesforce. You also have a pretty incredible background. I was joking about going down the Google rabbit hole with you. I also went down the Google rabbit hole with you, and you worked as an intelligence analyst in the U.S. government. You've worked alongside Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. What did you learn about mitigating geopolitical and ethical risk, and how have you taken that into your new role? And if you want to share any insane stories with us that have never been told, I'm sure we'd also love to hear those too.
I got to keep those secrets. No, but yes,
They've been declassified.
Yeah, I started my career out in the national security space, so working in intelligence. So I think that gave me a really unique purview of different, concerning things happening around the world, and also how technology was being used by various governments. So I think that's really where I started, in this space. I moved from there into academia and actually spent a lot of time studying, frankly, how some of these technical systems, thinking about mass surveillance, things like this, actually has a real impact, particularly on marginalized and minority communities. And so I think that's really where I started digging deep into understanding how certain policies and technologies can have unintended consequences. And as I move towards really looking at, technology businesses, advising big companies here in Silicon Valley, that's what really drove me towards this responsible innovation work that I'm doing today. And I think, again, it's sort of a unique path towards this work. But I think, again, the experience in the national security sector really gave me, frankly, an imagination for what can go wrong, right? A lot of times there's a lot of positive intent around developing some of these really interesting technologies, which is great. There's a lot of positive things that come out of that innovation. But it's important to always think about also, how can things go wrong? How can this be used and not as intended and cause harm? And how can we mitigate that from the front end? And so that's really the work that I'm doing, that my office is doing at Salesforce.
I feel like that's a good way to segue into this idea of responsible innovation. I remember 2009 sitting across from the Jack Dorseys of the world, folks like Mark Zuckerberg talking about connecting the world and democracy and how we can make the world a better place. And I was always an optimist too, to some degree. I was knocking on doors and convincing people in corner offices to put these people on camera. Let's talk about these types of things. And there wasn't the person in the room, right, that you are right now being like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Like, what is it to be this? And so I think that brings us to this idea of responsible innovation. How do you build that within these companies? It almost feels like a loaded word, given what we've seen over the last decade in this move fast and break things era of technology. So this is for both of you, and we can start, Toyin, with you. How do you think about responsible innovation, and what does that even look like? If you could give us specifically, because I think that's really helpful, like specifics, what does that look like in the context of your work?
Yeah, no, it's really, I think it's humbling for all of us, I think, to live through the time we're living through now, because there are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right? We know certainly that as we concentrate more resources, more power, more impact in certain sectors of the population, we have more ability, certainly for good, but so too comes the potential for bad and for unintended negative consequences, and the willful inattention versus the sort of truly unintended consequences. We have to start to really hold ourselves accountable to both, right? I think one of the things that I love so much about the business that we're building and the space in which we're building is it is possible, and in fact, I would argue increasingly table stakes, like imperative, that companies building specifically for marginalized populations, building in spaces that have real human impact on a day-to-day basis, to direct, tangible human impact, think about their the role that they play in either being a force for positive change, or reinforcing and exacerbating so many of the challenges that we've seen so far. And when I talk to healthcare communities, and when I talk to rooms of doctors and public health leaders and other healthcare leaders, it's sobering to sit in rooms of people who have spent their careers doing what has historically been believed to be sort of blank slate valorous work. When you work in healthcare, you go home at night more often than not saying, I did a good thing. I'm a hospital administrator. I work at a drug company. We make medications to help save people's lives. And the reality is that we are just as guilty and just as culpable as an industry as any other for perpetuating some of the social challenges that we see today. In 1990, the Institutes of Medicine published a report talking about unequal care. It was essentially about health equity and the lack of equity that we see in health outcomes across our populations. They shared reams of data, to pick any disease state, cancer to heart failure diagnoses to end-of-life care, and demonstrated that we systematically see differential outcomes and differential access to care for Black communities versus white communities, for Native American communities versus white communities, for rural versus urban, for older folks versus younger folks. And we've fast forward 30 years and nothing's changed. So who's guilty of that? It's us, right? And so part of, for us, what responsible innovation means, especially in healthcare, is to say, you don't get a pass because you're doing work that is historically in a segment that is thought to be positive. You have to actually dig deep and say, does our business principle align with equity, with value to society? Are we holding ourselves accountable for understanding historical antecedents and operating differently from them? Are we thinking about how we engage our communities, our employees, as well as our ultimate stakeholders in ways that legitimately drive value? And that is not the norm, even in a sector like healthcare. And so for us, it's really been about aligning our business case, our business model, how we make money with what we believe will drive better outcomes, and then constantly, humbly asking, what are we missing, right? Because we certainly can. We're all well-meaning people, have created a set of problems for all of us. It's not a lack of will, it's a lack of really that introspection and constant willingness to reevaluate and reassess.
And Rachel, same question for you. How do you, at Salesforce, how do you envision responsible innovation, and how do you see this in the context of what it is that you do, and especially in this specific sector?
Yeah, no, thank you. At Salesforce, I mean, as we think about responsible innovation, we really believe, again, that these the technological advancements, the benefits that they provide, these should be accessible to everyone. But it's not enough just to deliver these capabilities. But we do have that important responsibility to ensure that it's safe and inclusive for all. And so the way that looks like at Salesforce, again, and we have an entire team dedicated to this work. And our mandate is to ensure the responsible design, development, and deployment of these technologies. And as far as what that looks like practically, again, the framework, we're really trying to do this by design, right? We're trying to mitigate those risks up front, making sure that we are being held accountable by our different stakeholders, that we're really being inclusive in our process and our outcomes. And I can talk about in detail, we've really built a structure and an institution to really do that work. I mean, it starts with, our group really coming together, making sure we have the right representation on our teams as we do this work, thinking about the different stakeholders, thinking about the different perspectives we need at the table. We include trainings for our employees. Every new employee that comes into Salesforce is introduced to our office, right? We're really providing a service there. We conduct workshops with our product teams to really do what we call consequence scanning. This was your intention with what you're trying to build with this new feature, new product, and we'll walk through and identify both those intended and unintended consequences. And when we find risks, we co-create solutions to try to mitigate those risks. And sometimes that's in product features to help change things, changing of standardized features, many different things that we do in the product development cycle. And it's important that we really have that mandate from the top, just because, as many folks in the product space know, time is money. You want to sort of ship those products right away, but we really know that, again, you don't want to be shipping out a product that your customers can't trust or that's going to cause a problem on the other side. So there's a lot of value really to doing that work on the front end and not being part of the process.
Has it been difficult at all implementing some of those strategies? Because I can't tell you, I say this in a semi-loving way, but not 100%, how many times you sit across from tech folks, right? And they say the line of, we take these things very seriously and we've put structures within these companies, and you know that the thought is there. But when it comes, especially at these bigger companies, to actually implementing it, there are things that kind of go wrong with it. And it feels like you're kind of, at CNN, we had something called The Row, which is literally a row of people in Atlanta who look at a story and find everything wrong with it. Like, I feel like you are the equivalent. This was back when I was there years and years ago, but you are kind of that equivalent. Has it been difficult because you built this within a structure that already existed? I mean, what were the challenges of doing that? And if you could be as candid as possible, because I know people here who want to probably try to build these within existing structures.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because again, we're introducing like a natural friction into some of that design process. And again, in a company, trying to ship things out, that's really challenging. So again, I do have to emphasize the importance of having leadership that's really aligned with those principles and with those values, and really see that as important, and they can set that tone from the top. On the working level, obviously, we're working to also build that culture and demonstrate that importance. And we come into those meetings not trying to block deals or shipments, but really to be collaborators, right? And we really believe that that additional friction actually produces better products and better innovations that can really be a differentiator for our business. And we do have examples and cases where customers have really sought out our products because they're ones they know they can trust, and that there's been this process, there's been this thorough, look at the implications, because, their customers too want to know that they're providing a service that they can trust, especially when you think about AI, especially when we're thinking about that real impact on society. Yeah, so, it's part of that process. And again, really sort of spreading that gospel, if you will, and why it's important, and really demonstrating that message, and then demonstrating the value, not only just why it's the right thing to do, but what it can bring to the business, really.
And Toyin, you've spoken about this idea of creating a dignifying experience for people. And in particular, you talk about creating that experience for people who are vulnerable, for people who have been marginalized. You don't really hear as many tech folks or tech companies talking about providing dignity, but I'm sure people who are watching, people would love to do so. Can you give some specific examples of the choices you made as you've built CityBlock that actually reflect that priority? What did you do to provide dignity? Can dignity be coded?
Oh, wow. What a great question. I don't know. It's a really good question. So for us, it meant it almost at every level of the conversation, right? So when we were launching the company, there were very few, maybe if any, companies like ours with the sort of backers that we had, spun out of Sidewalk Labs, and the other backers that we had on our cap table and around us, raising, venture capital to put to work specifically innovating for this population. And so in some ways, and I really believe this, the fundamental premise of our company, that folks who are not often represented in rooms like this, folks who are not often represented in the rooms that we were in when we were pitching and fundraising, are deserving of investment. and their problems are deserving of, the PowerPoint deck and the, the fundraise and the incredible team that we put together to go solve those problems. And so that in and of itself is dignifying, right? And if you can do that across multiple sectors, across multiple problem spaces, where we're building for people who so often get the dregs of what our innovation and technology and our society, frankly, has to offer, that in itself is dignifying, right? And then we get to, so what is it that we're delivering? And for us, aligning our business model, the way we make money, with driving a trustworthy, timely, and high quality experience of care for our members means that we actually cannot be successful if we don't figure out a way to show up really differently for people for whom their prior experiences with the healthcare system have often been really alienating and traumatizing. And so if you bake the sort of the dignity component into the business, then we're not talking about a nice to have that you sprinkle on the top. We're not talking about a little team on the side that's thinking about, sort of how you accessorize the core product. What we're saying is actually that our business is predicated on us figuring out how to earn the trust of people who have been systemically marginalized by our healthcare system, walk alongside them, make them feel heard, seen, believed, and cared for, and light a path to a better healthcare experience that actually translates to better health outcomes and to less cost and less waste in the healthcare system. And that sort of magic synergy is what we've been in pursuit of as we built the business. And as we inculcate that into new hires, as we sort of continue to make sure that our goals and our OKRs and our core kind of business performance metrics are aligned with that kind of theory of change that I outlined, you then get to bake that into the sort of very being of and the sort of fabric of the company.
So what I hear from you is dignity is also creating a business model around this. And I mean, what's the valuation of the company at this point?
I mean, in 2021 dollars or 2022? Yeah. Just kidding.
You can do an average. We're a unicorn,
yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're a unicorn. How's that for, so you have been able to show that there is real money and there's real dignity.
There's real value.
And so talking about the business models and responsible innovation, I mean, what does it look like to build incentive structures that reward those things? Like what kind of incentive structures, what were you able to do? Some tangible things early on that were able to make it so you could build out $1 billion business around this concept of providing dignity?
Yeah, I mean, the tangible metrics and goals are, if you take a population of people who have struggled for a long time to get access, to be seen, all the things I described in the healthcare system, and as a result are receiving dysfunctional, fragmented, very high cost healthcare services in the hospital, which feels bad to most people. And you can shift that to the community, primary care, mental health, preventive care, addiction treatment, social supports in the community. You actually meaningfully reduce medical spend. So there's an economic value there too. And that is the fundamental incentive for our business, is to say, we take a dysfunctional system that doesn't work for anyone, not least on the experience of our patients, but it also doesn't work financially, and translate that into a model of care that meets people in their homes, meets them in their community, provides care on demand, does so with a workforce of people that have been trained in trauma-informed care principles to earn their trust, to build their trust, and deliver that experience alongside that financial goal. That's how it's baked in, and it's baked in throughout. And then, of course, we sort of bake in our net promoter score and all the other kind of leading indicators of whether we're engaging people in the way that we want to. But ultimately, the proof is in the outcome for us as the business, because that alignment is so profound.
I stalked some of your videos, and I saw one thing that you said about how you hired people based off, there are a lot of hiring principles, but the words you used were tenacity and empathy. And I was like, what an interesting duo of words when describing how you look for folks who are going into these communities. Any particular reason?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeking to do is to show up for people and show up with people, because again, for folks who have experienced our healthcare system and more broadly our social system, 60% of our members are people of color. They're almost exclusively people in low-income communities, folks who have experienced so much challenge in their lives and have had lots of promises made and broken to them. When you're seeking to rebuild and re-earn that trust, we got to keep at it, right? And the willingness to show up and show up and show up and show up over and over and over again is something that a lot of people haven't been afforded.
Yeah.
The grace to, you know, to struggle with your substance use challenges and then to come back up into recovery and to do that over and over again with someone by your side. That's not a privilege that many people have in their lives, as one example. And so we look for folks who really are committed to their communities, committed to showing up for people like them in many ways, and who are deeply empathetic, and you know, just incredible problem solvers. And we support them with the rest of the clinical team to wrap around that.
Right. And Rachel, I'm sure you guys have all sorts of initiatives. First of all, I mean, part of your team's work is you mentioned artificial intelligence. Part of your team's work is to ensure that technologies like AI aren't used for harm, and they will uphold basic human rights. So can you talk specifically about the work that you guys are doing around artificial intelligence and what measures you've taken? And then I'd also just be curious to know, like, the hardest decision. I mean, you're in like the ethics room. You're in a really hard room where I'm assuming you guys have really hard conversations. Like, tell us about AI and what you're doing, and then just shed some light on like the hardest conversation you've had in that room.
Yeah,
Sorry
no,
to put you in the hot seat, but you're far away, so it's easier.
absolutely. No, AI. So we have a whole ethical AI practice within our office. It's, you know, actually even before our office started, we have who's now our head AI ethicist, Kathy Baxter. She was a UX researcher really digging into this work back in 2018 when we did launch our AI product called Einstein. For CRM, she was already working on a lot of these questions around responsible AI and these questions. And so when we did launch that product, we actually launched a responsible AI practice and really laid out some principles around that work. And a lot of it is around, you know, let's think about doing this responsibly. Let's hold some accountability. And so part of that practice and the formation of our office, we actually had an ethical use advisory council also formed. And so this is, again, another institution within our organization to help us address those tough questions. Because the thing about AI and some of the societal impacts is there's not one answer, there's not one perspective, right? You really need to make sure you're taking into account these different global perspectives, right? Impact in the United States might look different outside the US. And so this advisory council, again, function to keep us accountable, features folks, external folks, human rights experts, tech ethicists, AI specialists, to really, again, scrutinize some of the work that we're doing there. It also includes internal executives and what we call frontline employees, which these are the folks closest to the product, the developers, closest to the customers. And so we have kind of this unique group that sits together. We meet regularly with this group, and then we bring specific challenges to them to really discuss and frankly have really difficult conversations, right? Because these
Do you have any examples? Like, what's an example of one you brought to them?
Well, for example, one of the limitations we have on the use of our AI products is around facial recognition, for example, right? So this is a capability that has many benefits. It brings a lot of convenience, right? There's a lot of interesting things you can do with this work, and there's a lot of great applications. But we also know historically this technology has been biased, particularly against people of color, against women, against non-binary people. And, you know, in certain cases, that risk just felt too great, right? For how we designed our AI and what it was intended to do, we decided to cut that out as an option for our customers to use it in that way, right? And that's a hard business decision at times because, right, you're losing opportunities to sell it in different places. But again, really taking that decision to say, hey, we're not going to, you know, push that. We've decided that's not where we want to invest and what we want to enable at this time based on where the technology is. So that's an example of, again, a hard choice where you're really weighing, right, the different considerations of different communities, different parts of society versus some business questions there. And I think in the end, it's paid off. So from the very beginning, we didn't allow our AI to be used in that way. And there's other examples, again, where we've set some rules and parameters around the use of our AI for things like predictive policing or risk scoring, if you will. These are other areas where we're concerned about bias, we're concerned about societal impact, and we have chosen not to enable it at this time based on where the technology is.
So, and to follow the hardest decision you've had to make it there?
I mean, I think it's some of those, again, decisions. And, again, we're here to represent different segments of society, really to bring that research and knowledge to bear to our executives. We're really advisors, right? We don't make the final decision, to be frank, but we're here there and to bring that information, to bring those considerations, to do that stakeholder engagement, bring those voices in the room, to really bring our leadership along in that journey to understand the full societal impact of these decisions, right? It's not just a business decision. We really have to think about our broader set of stakeholders.
A quick lightning round, because we don't have much time, and I want to get to a couple questions for both of you guys. It's day one. Let's workshop this. We're creating a company. We want to do good things in the world. What's the most important thing we can do as early stage founders to create a successful foundation for building out responsible technology? It's day one. We're at the whiteboard. What do we do? What's the first thing? I just put you in the hot seat, so let's go to you.
Oh, great. Fabulous. Day one, gosh, I mean, I think it's define your values and your principles really clearly up front, and be really like meticulous about defining those up front.
Great. Rachel?
That was actually what I was going to say, I swear, is really make sure you're aligned on those principles and values, because I think you want to make sure that everything else that you do from there really continues to align. And then as you do build out, again, your systems and processes for development of products and policy, make sure those are mapping back to your principles as you go along, because as things change and grow, you want to make sure you have that same direction and really keeping those values at the forefront.
What are other companies or thinkers who you guys think do this right?
Ooh, I don't get out much, and it's hard to, no, it's true, but like it's hard to see from the outside in. I mean, I think there's a culture, I think, right now of like a lot of scrutiny of companies just in general, and most of that's good, but it's very hard to see from the outside in the sort of process, the deliberation, what leads to the things we see on the front page or on a Twitter feed. So I don't know is the honest answer. I kind of I have a net of one at this point, and we've done some things well, and we've made some mistakes too, right? Like just like everybody. But it'll be interesting to see as more of the sort of proof points become clear in this crop of companies that were founded in the last decade or so. I think we'll start to be able to tell. We can certainly see who doesn't do it well, right?
Yeah. Like who?
Really putting us on this.
Oh, damn it. That's what happens. I get interviewed by a pro, and I'm like, oh God, stop it.
I'm trying to get this.
It's a safe space, Rachel.
Yeah, no, I've been really encouraged to see more and more companies start to develop offices like ours. And again, like we're not perfect, no one's perfect, but this is really an emerging space, this responsible tech space. And I'm starting to see a lot of nonprofits, a lot of new students entering to work in this space. And I think in part it's because like society demands it, frankly, and not to mention regulators are starting to demand it as well. And so I think there's a lot of external pressure that is actually really moving this industry forward, if you will, and really rising the incentives for companies to really take this work seriously and to build it in from the front end.
And last couple, I don't know if you guys heard, but Twitter has a new owner, Elon Musk. He's made quite a few decisions, some controversial. Obviously, quite a bit of debate over the company's role, its future, and the role in society. You are two powerhouse figures when it comes to thinking about responsible tech. You're in the room with Elon. He's here. What advice do you give him?
Oh my God.
These are zingers. I mean, I'll just say this. I think, again, to the point about, I think society's demanding it, other customers demand it. There's a lot of companies see value in making sure that, their ads, for example, aren't appearing next to really problematic content, right? And we're seeing that already with many companies pausing their ads on the platform, right? And that's sort of the fundamental moneymaker of the platform. So I think there'll be some natural evolution to seeing the value of taking seriously, again, the impact that your products have on the world. It really can come to the bottom line. And I think, again, that can be true for many companies, that if you don't take this seriously, there will be some repercussions that are really expensive to fix on the back end, frankly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I expect, again, haven't sat in that seat. Anytime there's like a reset or a level set or a, that is the point at which you should get in the room and define your values and your principles.
Yeah.
And I think those natural trade-offs will become apparent. But if the intent is to build and scale a lasting company in this world that we live in right now, you can't not be responsive to the demands of our stakeholders and users for transparency, for safety, for mitigation of those unintended consequences and potentially some of the intentional consequences. And so I think my advice that I can't even imagine being able to, in that position, but would be to say, like, what do you value and what are you trying to achieve here? And what are the principles? And I think that then becomes the platform on which you start to make those and adjudicate those decisions.
Okay. And last question before we go to audience questions. Obviously, what you guys do isn't easy. The role that you're in is not easy. You have both, I've looked at your backgrounds, you both have such incredible backgrounds of fighting for things and fighting for people and fighting to be heard. On the site for City Block, it says, be seen, be heard, be healthy. Toy and I get the sense that this idea of being seen is very personal to you and very important. Why?
I mean, it probably goes without saying, right? Like, I'm a Black woman CEO of a unicorn company. Like, there's like 4 of us maybe right now. And in many of the rooms in which I showed up, even before this, for my patients, I knew explicitly and implicitly that we didn't matter in the same way, right? I'm a Black woman CEO of a company in Brooklyn, where I live. I'm still 3 to 5 times more likely to die if I got pregnant and had a child than someone with the exact same clinical background, educational background, and resources as me because of racism. And so when we approach our community and our patients, people who are marginalized for various reasons, be it their race, be it their history of mental illness, be it the language that they spoke growing up at home, be it their sexual orientation, their chronic diseases that they hold, their disability that impacts their ability to move through the world, it is really personal to me, that feeling of not being seen and not having things built for you and not having solutions and resources intended to keep you safe. And so when we build for our population, we build with a real personal fire around changing that. And it is the greatest privilege of my life to get to sit on a stage like this and talk about the work that we do on behalf of people who could only dream, I think, of being in a room like this. So that's what it is about for me.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's beautiful. And yeah. And then Rachel, I'll let you jump in, and then we are going to take questions.
No, just to say it is a privilege, and I do think it's important work to help, large institutions that do have a global impact, really to be thinking about these questions and really steering this work. So it's a really privilege. Again, I think the practice of responsible innovation within big enterprise companies is really just beginning. And I'm really encouraged by the direction that it's going, and that this is really a growing space and starting to become more the norm rather than the exception. So
wonderful. And now I'm going to pass it over to Lyle to ask some questions. Thank you guys so much. And now other folks get to ask you questions. You're done with the hot seat for me.
I think these are the hardest ones I'm going to get. So I'm
oh, no, you would always be surprised. People have great questions.
Was going to say what an extraordinary conversation, but looking around the room, I think it's also fair to say that folks have been elevated to chills. Thanks, all 3 of you. So I think in the first place, this idea of calling out introspection around whether business principles align with equity, with understanding historical antecedents for work that's being done as table stakes is incredibly powerful. And to hear Rachel's testimony and concretely moving away from a potentially promising technology in certain contexts, but problematic in other contexts, eschewing facial recognition for those reasons as an example of that is just incredibly powerful. So we have a handful, more than a handful, of questions from folks around the world, it seems like. And I think we're going to combine 2 of them. So Suparna Chiber, asks, responsible tech needs patient and aligned capital, which VCs in capital markets normally aren't. So what funding mechanisms do you see cropping up? And then I think relatedly, Kane and Chan ask, Lena Beck asks, when you kind of build core business model components around responsible innovation or around your values, has that created friction with capital sources, and how do you approach that? So that question, I suppose, is to both of you, and maybe Torin specifically.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I see a lot of founders and would-be founders trying to solve really tricky problems that are sort of the intersection of a business problem and a social problem, which is kind of where we sit in some ways. Really struggle to get the right type of capital aligned for the businesses that they're building and the outcomes that they seek to have. And so I have a couple prongs to that answer. I think for us, we had the benefit of a what I think is a real social and healthcare problem that also is a financial problem. And so you can build a sustainable and scalable business case for investing on relatively aligned, very aligned actually, sort of VC time horizons with the right VC partners to solve these problems. Because we're really talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars of spend on reactive healthcare that could be better invested in primary care and community-based care. So there's a real synergy there. I see a lot of problems that are real, like problems worth solving that don't quite have baked in the same sort of financial cost or economic cost structure, where founders really struggle. And I think what we're going to see as a result is a shift to some venture/philanthropy to we certainly see the sort of double bottom line type of funds that are really thinking about social impact and thinking about economic impact on somewhat of a sort of balanced time frame. It's really interesting though to ask what the impact of the time we're going through now is going to be on even some of those VC expectations for return profiles, right? And so maybe part of the answer is we all just need to normalize around the idea that hard, gnarly problems take a longer time to solve than one might have wanted. And so maybe we should raise funds with that time horizon baked in if we really want to solve real problems. And so I think there's going to be a number of different iterations around solving these issues from a capital perspective, all of which are aligned to the notion that that you have to take the time to find the right type of capital. But I do think some of the hardest and most worthwhile problems to solve need more creative funding solutions in order to get to the right outcomes.
I think the provocation that capital needs to change fundamentally is obviously a critical one. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. This one comes from Kane and Chan. So corporate principles around responsible innovation ultimately can be toothless unless they're operationalized. So I know folks kind of spoke to this a little bit concretely. But and maybe Rachel, this is for you. Can you speak to even more specific examples around how Salesforce has operationalized responsible innovation? We had mentioned the idea of tying performance bonuses to, say, ESG metrics. But can you speak to maybe some of the ways that some of these principles can actually be operationalized from a culture perspective or a process perspective or an operations perspective?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we every new employee that comes into Salesforce, again, is introduced to our office. We offer trainings and do workshops with employees, again, because we're, relative to the business, a small team, we really want to spread this out so that the folks on the front lines are really thinking in this way and have that framework and know when to reach out to us and bring issues to our office. So that's been really effective. As I mentioned, we have our Ethical Use Advisory Council, which is not only external folks, but also internal. And so this has a couple of really interesting functions. So first, we have regular meetings with this group. Not only are we hearing from that outside perspective, giving some accountability, but it's actually really helpful with informing and teaching our executives, again, about these issues, about these questions, and really bringing them along on that journey and getting that outside perspective. So that's actually really valuable, and getting that buy-in and getting that alignment on what we'll be pursuing and not pursuing, and things like that. Other pieces are, again, working directly with product teams as they're developing to really develop solutions to mitigate that risk. We bring in outside auditors for our AI research. We have routine, work to make sure that we're devising the data that go into our AI models. We share our research externally, again, just to bring in that accountability. And so there's a lot of pieces built into the process. Again, it can sometimes bring some friction, but we really believe at the other end, it really develops better products. And frankly, to the earlier point, it can cost less than trying to do some of that work at the end when there's been a crisis, when there's been a problem. So it really can bring some efficiencies and some cost benefits as well.
What seems clear is that responsible innovation is not, say, a one-time intervention. It is a process and a disposition that comes from your first day mocking up things on a whiteboard to ultimately thinking in product meetings or afterwards with ethical tech auditors and so on. So we are wrapping up on time for this panel. I would kick it to Lori if you would like the last word here, or if you have any final questions.
I would just say thank you guys so much. This was such an interesting and important conversation, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So, Toy and Rachel, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Jama Adams in San Francisco. Thank you.
Wow. Wow and wow. Thank